Hello, Max McAllister from Traxxion Dynamics, back for what we're going to call part 3 of just kind of some verbal walkthrough instructions for do-it-yourselfers who are going to try and change out their own shock absorbers. This part, is applying to both standard and tour models. We're trying to point out things as we go along. We're going to have one separate little video, just kind of giving you an idea what it looks like to get the little electric motor out of tour model shocks, because we plug that back into the bike so the bike doesn't think anything electric is missing. And that's the electronic damping adjuster that goes into this pocket on tour model bikes. This is a standard model bike we're working on today. They just put a little blind cover on it with a hole in it so water could drain out if it got water in it. So that's the front off of that. So I talked about some stuff in the first couple videos, and so obviously there's a ton of work to remove the body work to get everything out of the way. And then I just wanted to show a couple of the little finer points I had talked about. You want to remember, disconnect your battery, but we removed the battery strap to help facilitate getting the fuel tank out. And what that does is, you see this here, it lets the battery box and wiring harness flex away, and you'll need that flex when you roll the tank out. You stay there, Mark. The fuel tank, you'll lift and roll up this way, and it'll stick on that battery box, but with the strap off, it lets it just flex out, and then the fuel tank will come away. The standard model bike, you actually don't have to undo anything at all with the right saddlebag. It can stay totally intact, so that's a little luxury there. There's two little tiny 10mm headed bolts that hold the adjustment knob on. You want to come around here and look up in there. You can kind of see, let's see how I'll touch it. Up in here, two little bolts go right here and hold your adjusting knob onto there. But you can get to that without having to deal with anything. We got our shock hanging in here, and this is our braided stainless line on here that we put on the preload adjuster in place of the stock rubber one. I did want to show you what I was talking about with the shock bolts. And actually this is a good place to do this because you can kind of really see it. I'm just going to let that hang there. So I was telling you about, they used to have a bore in the old days where you would put a bolt through and you would put a nut and tighten the frame against either side of the shock. But with aluminum frames, that stress in it can cause the frame to crack. So now they do this to where, if you look, this one side of it doesn't actually tighten at all against the frame. So the head is just supported. So when you put the bolt through, you're going to be tightening the bolt against the bushings of the shock and pulling it all to one side of this upper mount. And this head side will just be supported in the frame. So everything is drawn across and tightened. So it can feel strange when you torque this bolt. It can still spin. You'll have the sensation that it wants to spin. It will be tightened, but so it's because you're not pinching everything together. It may feel odd when you tighten the bolt. Just be kind of aware of that. So anyway, here's the shock, and like I said, it makes it easier. Actually, I'm trying to do this with the camera. Gosh, a little bit. Makes it easier to put stuff in. Normally if you had bushings a little big, bushings a little, it would be difficult to align things. This actually makes it much easier to do that. If you look underneath, we pull the dog bones away, the bolt that holds the dog bones swing out of the way. You can put the shock bolt, lower shock bolt back in, put the dog bones back in place. That's all actually pretty straightforward. In fact, you can almost do it while I'm sitting here talking to you. So, shock bolt goes in, and then your dog bones swing up and you put the dog bone bolt back in. And that's kind of all there is to that. Let's go around the other side of the bike real quick. When I take the certain things I use, when I take the fuel tank hardware away, I store it in the right rear saddle bag. That's one. I kind of use the saddle bags to organize things. Stuff related to the shock and stuff I'll put in this saddle bag back here. Don't forget my tip, open all electronic doors before you start doing anything, because you won't be able to open them after you've started with the bike. With the rear shock, a pry bar is nice. You can use a big old screwdriver, it doesn't matter. And all you're gonna do is, we put it on the center stand. We use a nice flat jack up front here under the motor. Jack the front of the bike up so the tire just touches the ground. And then, so no stress on the bike in any way. But then from here, you can just wiggle this pry bar, and that helps you push the bolts in and out, makes it easier. And then when you're done, I told you one of the little pro tips was taking all the slack out of the bolts. When all the hardware is in, you'll just put a little pressure on your jack, actually put a little pressure on the rear tire, takes all the slack out of the bolts, and then torque everything down the way you need it to be. And the fuel tank, you're just gonna have to kind of Rubik's Cube that back in. It really needs to be held exactly a certain way and go in. Another little tip, don't fill your bike up before you start this job. Full tank of gas makes it very cumbersome to handle that thing. All right, this is going to be pretty straightforward for any decent mechanic. Stuff that's going to be new, of course, the new front end on the bike. So I had talked about you need to get it pretty far stripped in order to be able to get the shock out. Because the shock is long enough that it goes up, behind the upper control arm and down into the lower control arm. So it won't just come out. So we got to be able to open those up to get it. I mentioned, we take the front wheel off. That makes it easy because you're going to have to get up in here and work a lot. All of the linings in here have to come out. They have to, or you can't get the bolts out. After I take the wheel off, another tip, hang the calipers back just so they're not beating on the bike while you're working on it, because you are going to turn it quite a bit while you're working. You'll be monkeying with the steering up there to get fairing liners and things out. There's a little bolt here you'll need to take away, because as I'll show you, we lift this whole operation away to get the shock out. We take the two big bolts out that are in the fronts of the control arms. Two great big bolts here. The lower one will require a 14 millimeter Allen socket. So you're not likely to have this tool, but you'll need to have one in advance. So a 1/2 inch drive, 14 millimeter socket. That's for the lower control arm bolt. That one's going to come out. One little trick, this upper control arm bolt just barely will come out, okay? So the radiator's in rubber grommets, just flex it against its rubber grommets, and that's all that's required to get it to come out. So just flex it and it'll come out. So once those bolts are out, the lower shock bolt is quite obvious on how to get out. Be very apparent. What isn't apparent is the upper one. So come around this side here. I had told you about pulling away a big block connector. So this is the large block connector that we're going to remove. It's got a lever on it. You'll push this tab, release the lever. The lever swings up as like a cam, and then you'll pull this away. And then, although you're probably not likely to be able to see it with the camera, we're going to put a tool up in this bore here to get to the upper shock bolt. Where you see the head of my magnet snaking in is where the upper shock bolt is. And to do that, the only thing we found effective is 8 millimeter. It's an 8 millimeter Allen. You need a universal joint. You're just pretty much going to have one. It's tricky to get it to lay up in there. You need to be 100% certain it's totally engaged, and that's how you're going to hold the shock bolt. So let's go around the other side here, and this panel of electronic couplers and such. There's a couple of bolts that hold it, one up in here, one down here, and then there's one of these push pins in an air snorkel. You just release that, and we're just going to let this lay down, okay? That's all there is to it. We're just rolling it down, right? And that gives us access to put a 17 millimeter Allen wrench into this bore here. So we got to get this, roll it out of the way. So up in this bore is where the nut is hiding. So anyway, there's a snarkle. So it's up in here. One more little bolt on a little bracket, and here you'll have to release. That lets you get on the bracket. So I mean on the bolt. I wish Honda had threaded the frame, because then there wouldn't be any concern. You just take it out the other side. But anyway, so you have done a little bit of stuff here. That left inner plastic pocket comes out in order to be able to get all this. So anyway, there you are at this point. And just for fun, I'll show you, if you come up here, this customer we're going to look at here, this is the actual, now his upper steering mechanism is loose on this bike. So you can kind of see this one is, right, show the end of the bars here, come back out. Okay. So we're going to work on fixing that today for him, because we haven't done that yet. So this panel will have to come off, that decorative cover, and then there'll be a normal steering crown nut like you might find on a normal upper triple clamp on any traditionally made motorcycle. All right, so now we've got all the hardware and bolts and everything loosened out. And from this point, you grab the fork by the bottom and you just pull on it. It fits very snugly, but it'll pull away, okay? And so you'll see it comes loose from the control arms. So now we've got a gap big enough to get the shock out of. You kind of need someone else around to help you do this. I have kind of done it by myself once, where I used a strap kind of around here. It's not ideal, but I actually used a strap behind here, pulled this up and strapped it away. That gave me room to get my hand in. But what we need to be able to do is get the shock into this hole and out. So with this lifted up out of the way, it gives us room to wiggle the shock out. Now, if you have a tour model bike, you will have to get the wire loose. So you can turn this upside down, zip tie it to something, hold it, all right, and so that it's hanging, so you're not pulling on the wire. And then you'll have to come around, and your hand is going to go in, and this is the hardest thing actually on the bike to disconnect. But I'm just going to shine my light, and maybe you'll be able to see my screwdriver, tip of my screwdriver wiggling in there. Way in the back in here, right back up against the motor, is going to be the electrical connector that disconnects the damping adjuster on the front shock. So you'll disconnect that, and then your shock will come out of the bike loose in your hand, just like this. It'll just have a wire hanging off of it. And then, like I said in another video, we'll show you how you unscrew this eyelet from there, and without damaging the shock in any way. You'll unscrew it and take the motor out, and we'll just plug the motor back into the bike. And then so assembly is reverse. Assembly is reverse of disassembly. You'll hang the new shock in there, and once it's in, again, I told you I like to take the slack out of the bolts. So I've been using just a little block of wood under this groove in the fork, a scissor jack, and we'll raise up on the scissor jack, take all the slack out of all the hardware, and then torque everything the way we want to have it tightened up. Another, let's call it important tip, is organizing this job. So if you come over, you can kind of see, I use some good old-fashioned muffin tins, and I have these kind of permanently labeled. I'm going to go get some new ones and make them a little fancier, but I label each pocket for the hardware and from what area of the bike it came from. I have 2 muffin tins. There's one on the other side of the bike. I keep the left hardware to the left, right hardware to the right, and you can see there's hundreds of fasteners involved in getting the bike to this stage. Keeping them organized is very important. And just to show you, what all appear to be bolts with 5mm Allen heads on them can all be extremely different in one way or another, right? So a 5mm tool takes all these off, but one has a shoulder, one's got a 6mm bolt. These are 5mm bolts. This one has no shoulder at all, and these are all just on the decorative covers over the cylinder head. So 3 different bolts in 4 different holes. So you got to be aware as you take it apart and keep it organized. That's going to be really important. And then we're doing this job repetitively, so if you kind of want to pan around, this is kind of the stuff that's going to have to come off. We take the engine covers and the cylinder head covers and the fog light covers off, so that, as you can see, we strap the bike down so that it will, just to be safe, so it doesn't bail off ever. People think this decorative cover will come off. Unfortunately, it won't. It's pinned from the inside. It stinks, unfortunately. It's kind of sad, because it would be nice if you could pop this off for trailering or whatever. But truthfully, for trailering, if you wanted to risk the cost of the little plastic cover, if you did pull these pins out, you could pop this in and out regularly if you so desired. I don't know that it's likely to ever bail off, but anyway, they've got it secured from the inside, so you can't do that. Radiator shrouds. These are inner under fairing liners. These are kind of the two decorative strips under the knee sides of the fairing. Upper fuel tank bracket in the rear, the support. This is the under chin, and you want to remember to put the under chin back in first when you start reassembling that, because everything else overlaps it. We've got mirrors, front fender, tank shelter comes off as a complete assembly, side covers, saddle, fuel tank, upper fairings. So there's a lot of body work, a lot of parts, and obviously you want to organize it and keep it protected so you don't scratch it up. Another tip, when you pull the front wheel off, I always do just kind of throw the axle back through in its orientation and put the nut on it. There's no way to screw that up. I do want to point something odd. The tread pattern appears to be backwards on your front tire, so make sure you keep it oriented. They have an ABS sensor on the left side, but the tread pattern is looks opposite of what you're used to seeing on a motorcycle. But they are mounted properly. The tire is mounted in the right direction. So I think that's all I can point out for tips on this. And I will say the most difficult thing is taking the outer. One of the most difficult things is taking this upper fairing panel off. There's a screw on the top, push pin here, screw down here, and I think I'm thinking right now is all it's. One more little screw somewhere. But anyway, once you have it loose, that thing is hard to get off. You're going to take it loose from the bottom here. It has a grommet down by the radiator, and the fairing has to come away this way and come forward off. But there's nothing to get a hold of here. I'm going to hold this. There we are. So this pops into grommets on the top here, and there's nothing to get a hold of. So I have just taken to pinching this hard and just with finger strength pulling on it. The grommets have no grease or anything on them. They are very, very tight, and you're gonna think you're gonna break the bike. It just seems that way, but you gotta really grab it and pull, and it'll go boink and come loose. So you'll start by getting this bottom part loose, and this will go boing, and come loose. Be careful not to drop it. And when you go to reassemble it, there's a tang here, and that's where the whole thing starts. You start at the very front. The piece is missing, but you engage the tang. Oh no, it is still there. No, it's not. Yeah, it's on the radiator cowl. So you engage this tang, work your way up along the headlight, right, and come back here, and eventually you will pop these two in the back in and go down towards the bottom. But taking this off, you're going to feel like you're certain you're going to break your bike, or it's just going to be stuck, and you're going to be calling everybody and saying, how do I get this thing off? But you just got to manhandle it. And this is the problem, is these two grommets here. They are stuck to that bike, and they're very happy where they are, and they don't want to come apart. So reassembling, put some grease on those so that you don't have that problem going into the future if you ever have to work on your bike again. And I think I did warn you about the super shallow hardware and the threat of stripping it. In particular, this is the most likely to be stripped bolt on this bike. You can probably see how shallow the depth of it is. It's probably 2 millimeters. There's nothing for your tool to engage, and the edge of it is chamfered quite dramatically. So when you put a socket in it, if it's not sharp, edged and square, let me show you. you will strip that bolt almost guaranteed. So ask me how I know. But so if you take your socket and have a bench grinder, you want to make sure you grind, you know, a very sharp edge on it. If there's any wear or rounding towards the tips of your socket, you'll wipe out some of that hardware. So it's got to be sharp on this bike. Because I guess they saved a few grams, or I'm not sure why. But again, look at just one of the 5mm Allen bolts. There's, you know, 2.5, 3 millimeters of engagement. If you can see they're very, very, very shallow as far as engagement goes for that. So anyway, all right, that's enough. So anyway, we're calling that part 3. Hopefully that gives you some more insight. Thanks for following the videos. And hopefully this scares you and you take it to you know, one of our authorized installers kind of things. And but if you're willing to tackle this yourself, this is kind of what you're going to need to know to get through it. So it's a big job. You know, pack a lunch is all I can say. So thanks a lot, Smacks.